In this video, we're going to be talking about next option on the Q menu here. It's bevel. Now you can see we have some options here, but before we're going to talk about these, let's actually talk about bevel and bevel behavior, because this one is a bit different than vanilla blender. In fact, a lot of these modifiers here are different. So they're not really classic vanilla blender modifiers. They're slightly different, a lot of them, all right? So this is why we're gonna be talking about these in a separate video. But here, let's talk about the bevel. So first of all, the difference between vanilla blender bevel is as such. If I'm going to add a bevel here, so generate and bevel, you see a few things in vanilla blender. We're gonna have a bevel at one segment. Also, it's set to edges, and we have quite a large bevel, so 0.1 meter, which is 10 centimeters, which is huge. And another thing, under geometry, on the miter outer, you have it set to sharp instead of arc. And I'm gonna show you in a minute why this is important. So when I'm gonna be running bevel from hardops, it's gonna be a bit different. Also, a few things gonna happen. First thing that's gonna happen is that hardops will automatically add auto smooth modifier. So look, when I'm gonna click on bevel, boom, auto smooth modifier just got added. Let me just collapse this H menu because it's gonna cause a heart attack. That's a lot of options. Don't worry about it right now. We'll mention them in a minute. So that's the first thing you need to understand. Also, by default, this bevel you can see on the screen here in the middle near the cursor is set to 3 segments, and the width of it is way smaller. By default, that's the width. It's really tiny, which is a perfect bevel for hard surface modeling. Another thing is that we have this miter set to arc. By the way, all the default behaviors for hardops bevel you can set here under Control tilde menu here on the bevel operations, and you can see it's set to angle, and there's a profile set to 0.7. It's a bit different than vanilla blender as well, which is set to, where is profile here? Set to 0.5, right? So the profile is a bit different as well. And also we have the miter set to sharp. So let me show you what this miter does, because you might be wondering what the hell is that, right? If I'm gonna cut this with a box, let me just set to box, and boom, add weighted normals with alt click on sharp, and you see my bevel here is nice and round. But if I'm going to, fix this bevel here, so let's select this cube, let's add 3 segments, let's make it a little bit smaller, add auto smooth, and then add weighted normal modifier, and then I'm going to grab another cube and move it here, scale it, and see that's a lot of operations in vanilla blender, and I'm going to cut it. You see, if I'm going to hide this cube now, right, we're going to have this nasty corner here, right? It's really, that doesn't really look good. And the reason for that is because this miter here is set to sharp. So you want to do is you want to change it to arc. And that's why hardops comes by default with this miter set to arc. Now, another thing is that when you select a different mesh, like plane, you're going to be able to bevel verts, which means the bevel will come in with the vert setting being prioritized over the edges, as it does here, right? Here you can see set to edges, here to verts, because hardops recognizes it's a plane, so there's no thickness to it, which means there's nothing to bevel other than this. Now let's talk about the other options here for our bevel, because they're quite interesting. So first one is going to be control bevel, which is going to add a new bevel at 30 degrees. Now by default, this first option will not really work very well for us, because if I'm going to add another bevel at 30 degrees, I'm going to have, North Korea. But what you can do, you can unroll this H menu here, and you can see a lot of options here. Not all of them you're going to be using, but for example, this one is very useful when you can hold Alt and scroll your mouse to adjust the angle of the bevel to something different. Like for example, let's say 60 degrees. Now I got 2 bevels. So if I'm going to run a cut now on this mesh like this, I got 2 bevels. I got this bevel, which I can change, press Q, and then adjust the other bevel. So now you see I got 2 bevels running on my mesh. Now that's not the best way of adding secondary bevel to your mesh. There's a better way of doing this, and I would recommend actually doing this by step menu, which is here, but we're going to be talking about step later on. So second option is going to be control shift, which is going to be adding another bevel at 60 degrees. So this makes more sense, because if I'm going to add this bevel, so hold shift and hold control and add a bevel, is going to add another bevel at 60 degrees. So now if I'm going to cut this mesh with a boolean and, adjust this bevel, right, and then press Q to adjust this bevel, now it makes more sense because this bevel comes already with 60 degrees angle, and I can have two bevels running on my mesh. Now, this is not the way I go about doing this. Normally, when I want to have a secondary bevel, what I do is I'm going to create a first bevel, then I'm going to run the step menu. So go here, operations step, and then when I'm going to run a cut here, is going to be sorted properly. And you see I don't have any artifacts on these bevels. I don't have to really adjust them. I'm going to be able to go in and simply adjust my bevels from here. So I prefer to use step method, and we're going to be talking about it in a separate video. So next option here would be to press shift to bypass scale. Now you may be wondering, what the hell is this, right? Well, if you go into scale an object in Blender like this, and you will try to add a bevel to it, you'll see the bevel is going to be stretched. Now, what Hardops and Box Cutter is doing, they by default reset the scale of your model. So let me just go here to this option and turn off the auto end panel, so this menu will not slide out automatically. I want it to be open here. So look at this. My scale is all ununiform, so it's all messed up. It should be 111. So when I click this and apply scale, it's gonna unify the scale. So this is, if you stretch mesh in object mode, you're gonna have this kind of a problem. So when you want to run any bevel or anything on it like array or solidify, you're gonna have distortions. So now what Hardops and Box Cutter do, they reset this. So watch, if I'm gonna start running bevel on this, watch these numbers, right? They're gonna reset to 111. So that's what's, what this is doing. If I'm going to bring this back and hold shift with this bevel, right, this will bypass the scale application. So it's going to keep these numbers and run bevel nonetheless, like this, which is going to be a vanilla behavior. So if you want it, you can have it. Now the same thing goes to Box Cutter, by the way. So if you're going to run a cut on this mesh, look what happened to my scale. The moment I draw a cutter, the scale resets, which is fantastic because when I want to then, work on this mesh, I don't have any problems. Now, sometimes occasionally what's going to happen, like you see here, that when I'm going to add a bevel to a mesh that's been booleaned, I might have some weird profile issues with my bevel. So watch this. I'm going to cut a mesh and then add a bevel, and this happens. Open H menu, and you can see here that you can adjust bevel profiles using keys. So all you need to do when this happens, press 1 on a keyboard, and it's going to simply, shift the profile back to the default one, and you're good to go. And then add weighted normal modifier by alt-clicking on sharpen, and you PG, okay? So that's how it works. Now let's talk about the other options here, because we have quite a lot. So another useful option from this menu, because not all of these options are really useful, but another useful option would be, for example, hardened normals. Now, weighted normal, we talked about this, right, is a modifier that you add when you have this kind of a situation and you want to flex your mesh. Now, occasionally, especially when you work on game assets, a weighted normal modifier will not work properly and you're gonna still have some issues with shading. If this doesn't work, try hardened normals. And hardened normals, they come with bevel. So they're embedded in the bevel. So if you go to bevel and you go to shading, you can see that it's here, right? Doing the same thing. So when you are adjusting bevel here with Hardops, you can press N for normals and it's going to simply add hard normal here to your bevel. In addition, you can go to Control Tilde menu and set this behavior as default. So if you're gonna set this to on, every single mesh that you're gonna add to your scene and you're gonna run bevel on is gonna have hard normals on it. So bevel, and if you go here, you can see on the shading, hard normals is on. So you can, change the default behavior here if you want to. Another useful option is to toggle the viewport. So you can disable, you see that this icon here, this one, it disables the preview of bevel in a viewport. So this is really useful when you want to see your shape a bit better, so you don't have to, stop the bevel, go here, then adjust it. It's really cool because you can adjust your bevel, press V, and kind of, see how it looks. Next really interesting option is gonna be the overshoot. So let me just run a bevel on this one, and I can't see how deep I can go here in order to maximize my bevel, so make it as round as possible. So you can press Z shortcut to see the wireframe, and this is really, really useful. Another use case of this one is gonna be when you, for example, have a shape like this, and you're running a sub D on it. So you are converting this mesh to sub D, and you want to convert all these sharp edges into bevels to create loops, right? So what you want to do is you want to go here to bevel, you want to press Z, you want to then scroll down to two edges, and then you want to press P to change profile, flex this to create a 90 degrees bevel. Then you want to press A to adjust the width of it like this, right? And then you simply click. And this is fantastic because this will allow you to dynamically set kind of like a network of loops that are gonna be acting as security loops for your sub D mesh. So if I'm gonna clean this, all these marked edges, we have edges marked sharp. We can have marked sharp edges when we're running sub D, it's not gonna work. So let's remove them by going to Q menu in edit mode and unmark them, right? And then if I'm going to apply this bevel here, and I'm going to run subdivision control 1, you will see, and obviously I have to remove auto smooth because auto smooth will try to sharpen all these edges, which conflicts with sub D. And then obviously I'm going to have to, kind of connect these edges here a little bit to clean up this this top face because it's collapsing on itself, right? There's simply not enough geo to support this subdivision, and there you go. And you see now you got very beautiful uniform edges around your mesh for your hard surface model. And also, in addition to this, it creates really beautiful corners. So these are proper, corners that you want to run on a mesh. When you want to run a sub D on them, you want to have a loop around these corners. So this is a proper way of running corners for sub D. So that's this is a superb tool because you can run a bevel on an entire model or entire object and very quickly create all these kind of equidistant loops for your sub D. And there are a lot of people who think that, oh, these add-ons like hardups and box cutter and whatever, they just good for n-gon workflow. That's not true. We have an entire course which I recorded using add-ons that we use for hard surface like hardups, box cutter, machine tools, mesh machine, Kibblerator, and all other add-ons. This entire course is an add-on fest, but it's an extremely efficient and quick way of working with sub D because sub D doesn't have to be a pain and misery. It can be actually interesting, although to be honest, it's still not as much fun as n-gon workflow. But there you go. But sometimes you do need sub D, so if you need it, you can use add-ons, and this course will teach you how to do that properly. So grab it if you want it. Anyway, so that's that's that. And there are other options here, like for example, you can change the miter of the bevel, etc. And some of these options are not really that useful, but the ones I showed you are very useful. So there you go. That will be bevel in hardups. All right, I think that's it for this tool, and in next video we're gonna be talking about array.